to introduce our next speaker. Prior to setting up in practice, Andy Foster worked for the internationally renowned firm of Arup and Partners. Becoming one of their youngest directors, he led numerous multidisciplinary building design teams. Since 2004, Andy has been committed to establishing Andy Foster Architects, and now Raise Architects, as a local practice with multiple offices and a reputation for talented teams. Andy has taught and lectured widely and is currently a member of the Cheshire West and Chester Design Review panel and a Design Council Built Environment expert. Chester has seen the embers of a creative sector growing in the last few years. Organisations such as Good for Nothing, Murmurations, Industry and Tortoise Magazine, to name just but a few. It's a fair observation to say that these groups came into existence because there was a vacuum. Until Story House opened for a few years, there was no permanent theatre, no permanent cinema. The city was a cultural desert. These organisations and what they stand for could be a template for how we grow the creative sector in Chester, a sector which, if given the right encouragement, could point our city in a direction which will set us apart from out-of-town shopping destinations and the larger cities in our region who seem to hoover up all the available talent. To give his view on how we can contribute to the future success of Chester, I'd like to welcome Andy Foster.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Thanks very much. Let's see if we can get this to work. So Nick very kindly asked me to speak today. He didn't tell me it was going to be this big, but and I'm suffering a bit. I'm loaded up with medication, and I hope I can get through this okay. Nick asked me to speak about the built environment, so I chose to ignore that and suggest a title of People, People, People. Primarily because I'd really like to assume that that we're an audience of equals here, sharing a common ambition to make Chester the best place it possibly can be. So regardless of what your role is or your position in the city, an assumption of a level playing field would be a rather good start. The other thing is I'm an architect, which gives me an excuse to not wear a suit. But also, you may think that I spend all of my time thinking about buildings. You'd be right, I spend a lot of time thinking about buildings, but you might be surprised how much time I spend thinking about people. Obviously, the clients that we work for, the teams that we work with, the planners. We spend too much time thinking about the planners. Neighbours, the impact that our proposals is going to have on other people, and then subsequently the builders and everybody that's going to deliver the project. So people is a good starting place, and when we're talking about the built environment and development, everybody knows it. It's very easy to forget about it and lose sight of it. In that vein, I wanted to talk a little bit about place and about belonging. And if you excuse the indulgence, I felt the best way to do that was through a personal method. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about my connection with Chester and what it means to me. You will all have your own relationship with Chester. So I'm in Chester because my parents came to Chester from Manchester in the 1950s, just to prove that I had parents there. There they are on the right-hand side in the 1950s. My father was a structural engineer who got a job at in the petrochemical industry around the Mersey, and my mother was a teacher who taught at Merton House in Liverpool Road. They bought a house off plan in a new small development off Liverpool Road called Garth Drive, and they never moved out of that house. So that house, which we still own, is home. Wherever I've been in the world, that has always been home to me. So you can imagine the sense of stability that Chester has brought, and the sense of belonging is quite important. So I grew up in the 60s, and conscious awareness of the built environment in Chester happened to coincide with the completion of the inner ring road. So that's the period of time that I know Chester from. My first recollection of having an emotional response to buildings and the built environment wasn't actually in Chester, but I'll just very quickly repeat it for you. Because they were from Manchester, our relatives were annoyingly close. And so every other Sunday we had to go and see them. And this was before the motorways were built, and the main road somewhere between Warrington and Manchester passed a colliery. And this colliery alongside the road had an administration building, which was a very long, low affair, with a tower in the middle of it. It must have been built in the 1930s because it was done in a kind of Art Deco style. And the tower had a curved feature on the top of it, which had this thing that came over the top. And sorry to say it, but it bore a striking resemblance to a fireman's helmet. So it was a tower with a fireman's helmet on the top of it. I won't elaborate any further. But I didn't like it. I just did not like it for some reason. In fact, I really, really hated it to such an extent that my parents were under strict instructions to give me, on future trips, a 1 mile warning that it was approaching, so that I had time to pull my jumper over my head and dive down behind the front seat so I didn't have to see it. Now, of course, we all have responses to buildings, which I think is a good thing. I think it's part of architecture. We all have a right to a response that comes before thinking, before knowledge, which is only to say that architecture is a branch of the arts, and rather like a painting on a wall, you will have an immediate response before you know anything about that painting. But the thing about buildings, they're not just there to be seen, they're there to be inhabited and used, and our relationship with buildings comes from experience. And now this building, or at least the original Odeon part of the building, has a certain significance for me, because at Saturday morning cinema, this is the place where I held a girl's hand for the very first time, which is not something that I think about all of the time. But now whenever I come to Story House, as soon as I put my hand on the handle of the front door, ping, that thought comes into my head and I just can't stop it. So we have a relationship with our built environment which is completely different to any other aspect of the arts. And we all have memories. I remember bizarre things like the black and cream floral carpet in Browns that when you walked across it went crunch, crunch, crunch. Walking past William Jones reminds me every time of the incredible smell of roasted coffee and the big red bacon slicer. Mm-hmm. All sorts of things, the bounce of the suspension bridge, the sheer terror that I experienced when I dived off it. Please don't tell anybody that. You know, we all have these experiences, which is to say this place is not a development opportunity. It's not real estate. It's our home, and we share it communally as a resource. We might not legally own it, but I really do believe that it is our place. So how do we... let me just turn the page so I know where I am. Right. Hang on. So just going back to my little story, from an early age being interested in buildings, I didn't actually become an architect straight away. I went into structural engineering like my father. And this is a selection of buildings that I worked on before I came back to Chester. They were all very large, complicated projects, very high profile. I was really lucky that they all got built. And so I've been able to have this experience of being involved in projects at very early stages when they were all about ideas, right the way through to delivery. When I did finally decide to leave London and the big project world and come back to Chester, I really had an ambition to get involved in the city. It took a while. It wasn't until 2013 that when I was president of Cheshire Society of Architects, I organised on their behalf a lecture series which was designed to bring really good architects from around the country who are doing really good things in other historic cities to come and show people. We opened it up to the public, and it was very well attended. And it was followed by a design debate that we organised jointly with the Chester Civic Trust. And 200 people turned up on a very miserable February night to debate the architecture of Chester. I wanted to do more, but other things got in the way. I wanted to bring in people. I got interested in people that have a big impact on their place. As an example, people like Pam Warhurst, who set up Incredible Edible Todmorden, or Peter Florence, who set up the Hay Festival, or Tim Smith of Eden Project fame. In the end, that transformed itself into, with some colleagues in the audience, into Murmurations, which is an annual event designed to inspire people to do good things in their place. And we'll be organising another one of those this year. This has become a bit of a tagline for the event. I wish I'd said it myself, but it wasn't. It was my colleague Tom. If you want to live in an interesting city, you have to contribute towards it. Everybody knows it, but the interesting thing is the more you contribute to it, the more interesting it becomes. So we quite like that as a tagline. Before I get on to Storyhouse, what I wanted to say about that experience and what I've learned from talking to people and listening to people around town about their built environment is that I think, and this is some sweeping generalisations coming up here, but people in Chester care deeply about the place. They really do want good things to happen, and they do want to be involved. They want to participate in whatever way they can in shaping the future of the place, but they get frustrated when they either can't, or the opportunities are not there, or they don't know how to. They take it personally when they see bad things happening, and there are plenty of examples of buildings around town where you just want to pull your jumper over your head and hide behind the front seat. But the really good thing is that we did something right, and the thing that we did right is Storyhouse. It's an example to us that I think gives us confidence that we can make the right decisions and that we can deliver a world-class facility in little old Chester. I think it's hugely important, not just because we now have the facilities, but I think it's a big fillip to all of those that have been waiting for things to happen. And I wanted to put it in some kind of development context, because before Storyhouse, the last big cultural projects were done at the turn of the century, the Millennium projects. And they were done in a very 20th century kind of a way. People were asked to come up with ideas. Money was thrown at those projects from the lottery fund, and they were built out, and the hope was that people would come and the projects would be successful. Build it and they will come kind of thing. And many of them were successful, but they weren't all successful. The Millennium Dome itself wasn't successful and stayed empty for a long period after the Millennium. The Earth Centre in Doncaster closed, and the Centre for Popular Music in Sheffield subsequently closed. And even some of the ones that were successful in their own right were intended to be catalysts for wider regeneration in their area, and they didn't become catalysts. So one of the reasons that I think Storyhouse is so important is because there were a series of right decisions, not just one right decision. I think it started with the formation of Chester Performs, the building of their reputation over time, the building of the audience before they built the building, the choice of the Odeon as the place to do it, the inspired decision to use Bennett Associates as the architects who had just completed Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford, the decision to incorporate the library, the way in which the library was incorporated, And then a whole series of secondary decisions, not least the fact that the building doesn't have a formal reception or a box office, and it's completely informal and great. I don't think any of that could have been planned right at the very beginning. So ideas have been built on over time, and the end result, I think, is fantastic. To the extent that now, if you're another town or city in the UK and you're thinking of doing a big cultural project, you have to look at Chester. You have to look at Story House, and I don't know about you, but that fills me with immense pride. We did it right once. So what are we going to lead on next? What's the next big theme that we can get behind? How do we do redevelopment, big-scale redevelopment in a historic town? That would be a good thing to lead on, wouldn't it? How do we capitalise on our incredible heritage? What about community participation? We've heard a little bit about that already. I'm not talking about just doing it. I'm talking about being a country leader in it. What about sustainability? I've always been of the opinion that Chester is an interesting size. Not too small, not too big. We can do things that smaller places can't do. We should be nimble enough to do things that the big places can't do as well. What about no car use? What about maximum cycle use? I won't get into parking strategy. What about designing a city for women? What about designing a city for people with impairments or for children? What about the city as a stage, which is a big theme of the heritage and visual arts strategy? How does that come about? What about the experience economy? What themes do we collectively want to get behind? Just a few that you can use as a vision for the next unforeseeable future, right? Because if I was to have a say in what we ought to lead on, it would be vision and it would be engagement, because those are the things that unlock a whole series of other things to follow on. As far as vision is concerned, you know, personalities come and go, political parties, dare I say it, we are in a very marginal seat, they do come and go. Initiatives come and go. One city plan was a big thing, then it's become less of a big thing, it might get a bit of a lift again. You know, these things go through cycles. But as a place and as a community, I think we need some big level things to rally behind that keep the momentum off into the future. And then as far as engagement is concerned, I was listening closely to what Andrew was saying, because I'm a big fan of more engagement. I've been sitting in board meetings of Chester Renaissance and the Growth Partnership, and have often felt that we're being presented old news, even at that level. And then when it comes to public engagement, a series of boards in the Palatine Room, in the Town Hall, or in a retail shop in the Forum. If the next round of engagement only amounts to that, then I think we will have failed. Because if we're talking about projects like the Northgate, which are big imaginative schemes, we've got to deliver this engagement to the public in an imaginative and engaging ways. We can't just give lip service to it. That's my opinion, anyway. This is an interesting report from the RSA from the year before last. This is looking at the spectrum of the possibilities of public participation. We don't very often get out of the left-hand box. I don't think anybody would expect Andrew to hand over executive power to Joe Public in the very right-hand box. But the more that we can come over to the right, I think the better. It's an interesting report and well worth a look. So, some buildings, some development. I've put 4 different types of projects in here, some of which you know and love, of course. You'll have seen this one before. So the latest on D House is that, as you probably know, Thwaites pulled out of the lease agreement last year because they were bumping into unexpected costs. And so we're back to square one again. What do we do with it? Well, the decision that's been made about the next step, not the decision what to do with it, is to form a working group between the local authority and the Chester Growth Partnership. And we pulled together a body of people who have been very vocal about D House in the past, you know, both sides of the knock it down, keep it, divide, and anything in between. And I've been asked to chair that group. I don't know whether I'd upset anybody, but I have been asked to do it. It is a really difficult situation because we're all aware of the God knows how many years of previous debate about it. But if I can have any influence on this working group, it's first of all to say that I'm completely open-minded about it. I've never had an opinion because I never thought that I knew enough about it. And the very first things that we've been trying to do in the 2 meetings that we've had so far is bring some real facts and some real experts to the table. And if I could have been able to share what we heard on Wednesday evening when Tony Wilmot from English Heritage, who led the excavation of the amphitheatre, and Stuart Ainsworth, who's here today, who talked expertly about the whole St John's precinct area. If you knew what they know, your opinion of this building will change. Inevitably, it will change. From whatever position you held before, it will change and become different. We hope to do those presentations in a recorded way so that everybody can take benefit from that. So it's early days, and of course we're going to be together for 6 or 7 months, and that's going to cross over the local elections. So we'll be reporting back to whoever is the next administration. The next obvious one is, of course, the site next door, the Northgate scheme. Little dig here. This drawing is out of date because this is the drawing on the Northgate website at the moment. Shows the old scheme, and this is from May 2016, and that's my red line around phase 1. So the intention is, as I understand it, is to push forward on phase 1. That is still showing the hotel at the west end and car parking, which is all going to become car parking. And another working group between a local authority and Chester Growth Partnership has been set up to consult over the refinement of the design of phase 1 and then what happens to the rest of the scheme. If I was permitted, and you know, I've got the lectern, so I'll permit myself to say a couple of things. First of all, I think we're really lucky that we've never built it out before, because whatever it was before would have been wrong. Nobody can predict the future, but of course the way in which you develop a big site like this over time, there are lots of different decisions to be made, and I think that whilst it may be right to do phase 1 as a one development thing, the rest of it perhaps should be developed over time in a suck it and see kind of a way. Let the local authority develop a master plan for it, but the way in which it's built out, what the uses are, let's keep an open mind about it. Have a plan for the future, but allow that plan to be flexible and develop over time. And now that we own it all, we're going to have to think about selling some of it in the future as well, because Chester is a town of variety and character and interest. And if you develop a scheme like this as one client, one developer, one design team, you don't get the interest in the built environment that Chester deserves. So finding ways to orchestrate that is going to be hugely important. That's all I wanted to say about it. The next one is the Common Hall Street area, which I think is just as difficult as the Northgate scheme, but completely different. In this case, because the council don't own any of it, other than the pavements and a tiny little sliver of public realm. And if we want to bring an area like this, which is right in the heart of the centre, more meaningfully into a useful way in the city centre, we're going to have a really long-term vision for this place, and because it's currently in the too difficult bit, not a lot happens. But things do happen. Buildings are sold, and when they come on the market, you've just got that little window of opportunity to influence and do something about it, or perhaps buy, turn into public use, or whatever. But if you haven't had a preconceived thought about what you want to do with the area, all of those opportunities get missed. About 3 years ago, I was involved in a series of workshops about the area, and a development brief has been produced since then. So I know things like, Quick Fit, the big blue rectangle on Nicholas Street, was spoken to, and they're quite happy. They've got a successful business there, not thinking about selling up. But who knows what's going to happen with car ownership in the future. At some point, that business will do something else, and that site will become available. What do we want to do with it? Because it's really, really important. The big L-shaped office block on the corner has been vacant for a long time. What's going to happen to that? We need to be thinking about this. And it may take 50 years, not 15, but 50 years in order to successfully bring an area like that back into the city in a useful kind of a way. So long-term vision, really important. And then another one that you know and love. The former Quick garage. I'm on the Cheshire West Design Review panel, and I reviewed a scheme for this about 3 years ago. And this is a really big site and an important location, privately owned. And the big problem that I think that developers have is that they really only know two things that are going to be commercially viable, possibly three now. Retail, some form of residential, and the current fad, hotels. So even if they put a mixed use category on it because it's a bit of retail and it's a bit of residential, it's not really mixed use. And this I think is such a big site that it really shouldn't be developed out by one developer. And the kind of thing that I'm talking about is when you think about the area around here, it's not too far away from the castle. Castle's a big difficulty, but at some point in the future it will have a cultural arts or heritage use. And then St Mary's Creative Space, and then if you think about the old archive building in Duke Street, which will come available in the not too distant future, that's an old warehouse building suitable for live work or arts or artist studios and all that. You could start to see a vision for some kind of cultural arts thing going on down here, which is in contrast to performing arts at this end of the town. And if you had those kind of thoughts, then you might want to start talking about the owner of this thing to try and get some other public benefit use out of the site. Now, because I hadn't heard anything for 3 years since I did the design review, I thought, oh, crikey, if I'm going to talk about it today, I must find out whether anything happened. And I'm glad I did, because a planning application has just gone in for it. It's currently being validated. I haven't seen it. It will be available on the council website next week, and I'm sure you'll be all interested to see what it looks like. Am I all right for time? Okay. I'll abbreviate this. I wanted to say something about existing buildings in the city centre. I think that the word on the street is there's lots of empty space, and one of the main reasons for all of the empty space is that above the road is all a bit difficult and tricky because of access and because of fire issues and all the rest of it. This is a slide from a couple of years ago. These are projects that my practice have done in Chester City Centre. We've done more since then, so we have some knowledge, and we've done about 5 or 6 residential conversions of spaces above the rows, and we've managed to make all of them work. Difficult, but we've managed to make them work. It's not to say that others won't work, but the ones that we've touched have worked. The reason that there's a ton of space empty in town, and it's not really to do with technical difficulty. It's more to do with commercial concerns and with landlords. If a landlord has let a building to a high street tenant, and that tenant only wants the ground and row level spaces, not interested in above, well, both parties are happy to just pay for the whole building, just crack on with it. If you're a landlord that owns a lot of property and you have a maintenance budget, well, you'll be diligent about the way in which you spend that money and bringing empty space back into use. I mean, nobody knows how much space is vacant, but you know, the most sustainable buildings that you can possibly build are the ones that you don't knock down, and a lot of our buildings fall into that category, but they lose their sustainable credentials if they're not used. And I think that we need to do something about it. We need to be more aware of the reasons that they're empty. People need to have some form of incentive and encouragement in order to bring them back into use. And then I'll skip those other examples and say finally, this is my, well, one of my favourite architectural criticisms, if you like, equally applicable to people designing or implementing buildings as to any other realm of life, politics in particular. It has a few parallels, like there's what you want and there's what you really want, and there's conversations about things, and then there are real conversations that lead to good things happening. And I think that from certainly my experience of being in Chester and doing the things that I've been doing, that things have changed, attitudes have changed, and the time is ripe. And Storey House gives us that confidence to start doing some more really good things, more projects that are on a par with Storey House and not on a par with my pull over your head tower. That's what I'd like to see. How about you? Thanks very much.